Michelle. How's it going?
Fine. How you doing, Ms. Kim?
Thanks a lot for letting me come into your class today, inviting me in to observe you.
Of course.
Science, what class is that? Biology?
Yes, biology.
To watch you teach close reading. That is our school-wide initiative, and it's critical as we execute Common Core state standards.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
First of all, let me just start by commending you on what I was not going to observe, which was the level of questioning that was executed in your class.
I appreciate that.
So you look like a pro there.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think it's really great that when your students, how the students said it was an answer and it was the correct answer, but how so much dialogue emerged because you threw it out there for them to come up with support for the correct answer.
And that's what I've really been focusing on, getting them to show evidence, not just saying yes or no, but why is that the right answer? And really support it with the evidence, whether it's from their notes, from discussions we've had, to really remember and support. Even if I rephrase the question, how can they still support it with evidence?
So let me just ask you, whenever they have to write answers, because I know there's some questions that were coming beyond that, do they have to use text evidence to support?
Yes, and I've been stressing that through my DNAs, really writing in complete sentences, and then also really stressing, supporting whatever their answer is with evidence. No simple yeses or nos anymore.
Okay, because I did see students relying on their textbooks and flipping through them to find the answers. But I know it's very important that our students are giving answers, but also citing text evidence.
Yes,
that's
definitely.
one of the first standards in reading informational text, literary text, that they have to cite text evidence. So kudos to you in that regard. So today's lesson, you had the students do a close read. So I'm just going to ask you, how do you think it went?
I think it went okay. I mean, it was my first time with this actual close read, which is the nitrogen cycle, and it's still it's still a new concept with that I've been incorporating into the classroom. So really going through the text and pulling out some of the vocabulary, since it is a new topic and this is still a new concept, close reading, and just introducing new strategies for it. So we're still learning, and I'm still learning and kind of seeing what works for each class and changing it as I go. But I think it went pretty well.
Okay. So what, based on the student work, what lets you know it went well?
I think it went well because they were able to, by walking around, I could see them coming up with questions, writing them. In the margins, I saw them circling words they were unsure about and underlining. And then as we discussed it and we read through it as a class, they were able to pull out that vocabulary that they weren't familiar with. And then later on, after you left, we started to break down some of that vocabulary. So using context clues from previous vocabulary words and seeing words that were familiar to them, and then kind of using that as a way to scaffold the new vocabulary.
Okay, so I have two questions based on what I observed. You asked the students to read through a first time.
Yes, just a cold read.
Just a cold read, and then had them to go through and apply the protocol that you had on the screen.
Right.
Why did you do that?
So I think sometimes they don't understand that even quote-unquote experts have to read things multiple times. And so what I want them to get in the habit of is reading something first, just kind of reading it. I've been doing it with like videos and things like that. I'll tell them, watch the video first, just watch it. And now go back and look for, pull notes out. Because I think you need to just see it in its context and just kind of read through it and then try to pull out information. And so that understanding that you may not get everything the first time. Absolutely. And so to just get in that habit of doing that. So the cold read was a one time, it's just a couple of paragraphs, read it first and then go through and try it. Otherwise they're focusing on the highlighting and the underlining, and they're not reading and they're not comprehending.
Exactly. So one other thing, you had the students you had one student document the words that they pulled out. Why did you decide to use that method?
I think it's a method that they're familiar with. We'll pull the one sheets and kind of do that, have a student come up, whether it's a different activity when we're doing our Unit 2 vocabulary. So they're used to of standing up in front of the class and kind of working together as a group to pull out words or use vocabulary and break it down that way. So I figured, why reinvent the wheel, just use what I've already been using.
Right. So if I was going to give you any points,
Yes.
any feedback,
Thank you.
so to speak.
I appreciate it. I'm going to write
Thank you
some
for
points
recording
down.
it. Awesome. To you,
Thank
and
you.
we only grow in this area. It is my content area.
Yes.
Okay, so if you were coming to teach me about the nitrogen cycle,
Yes.
the tables would be turned. I would say with the chart, I would have the students list those words as well that
Okay.
that they circled as
like
they're
make a
being listed
separate
here.
list?
Just in the margins of their paper as a strategy. And the reason I say that is that because this practice is a good practice,
Mm-hmm.
but we wanted to translate to the individual. It is a great whole group task.
Right.
But it helps the students begin to make sense of what they're reading about. So you wrote the nitrogen cycle. So imagine if your students did a close read, they wrote the title, and then they began to pull out language from the text that had to deal with the nitrogen cycle.
So just making a list of the words that they pulled out.
Yeah,
on
the
side.
information that they're pulling out, that becomes important information. It becomes information actually correlated with the nitrogen cycle,
Okay.
which is what this text happens to be about.
Okay.
Okay. And I would also maybe even start, you had this question up here, but you said the nitrogen cycle. I would turn that into a question.
Right.
Do you know why?
Because then it kind of frames what is the main idea, what's the purpose of this?
What's the purpose?
Purpose of this reading.
Yeah, it sets the purpose. And if we all get all of our students to begin turning headings, subheadings into questions, it sets a purpose. It's an age-old strategy and
Okay.
task, but it works. It sets a purpose for reading. It gives students a reason to begin circling, highlighting text, and pulling out information that correlates, important information that correlates.
Now, I
What
wrote
is
a-
the nitrogen cycle?
I wrote a question here for myself. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
get a chance to actually ask my students, but my question was, what info do I know just from the title? What do you think about that?
I think that's great as long as you ask the question and model for them how to answer it.
Okay.
So I don't know if you're going to just go ahead and do that as a means of setting a purpose.
Right.
And read through and go back and answer it, or using background knowledge to answer that.
Right, and that's what I would do because we've already talked about 2 other cycles.
Okay.
So now, what info just from the word cycle and what we've been talking about previously can you infer? So I'm
Absolutely.
trying to get them to make inferences based on just what we've been doing
Absolutely.
on our prior knowledge.
Absolutely. So, the last point that I would make is while I watched you with the class, I would have authentically began to highlight initially.
Okay.
You gave them an example, but I would begin, and of course you would have to use a piece of paper repeatedly unless
Right.
you had the tools to highlight on your whiteboard or something like that. But I know you put it on the overhead. So when you highlighted nitrogen, I would say, okay, my task is to circle words for this purpose, highlight words for this purpose. So as I start reading this, it says nitrogen is a crucial element. I'm highlighting nitrogen because,
Okay.
and
So walk them through maybe
Walk them
one or
through
two,
a-
three,
a
you
couple
know,
of
a couple of
sentences.
sentences.
Exactly.
And this is why I did this. This is why I
Exactly.
circled these, and this is
Exactly.
why. Instead of just showing them the finished product.
just showing it, yes.
Instead of
Yes.
showing the finished product.
Why do you have
Why did
to
I-
walk
why
them
did I
through?
do this?
Why do you have to?
Because I have to model what I want them to do.
Yes.
And how I want them to pull out the same kind of information.
Absolutely. So what does
Okay.
that mean, though? Let's go a little deeper. You have to model it.
Right.
We have to show. Now, it's a little different maybe if you were showing them dance moves, right?
That's true.
So with reading, you have to speak out loud the what's going on in your head.
Right.
So why is that so important?
I think that, well, for me as a reader, like to really critically think about the topic, I have to actually understand it.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's a word in there that I don't understand, it could hold up and stop the flow
So
of
how do we
learning.
articulate that concept to our students? Because what happens with our students when they're held up?
They just get stuck and they'll
They
stop
get
reading.
stuck. So it's good for you to even model maybe getting stuck.
Right.
You know, saying, I know this word, but I've seen it before, but I don't remember what it means. Let me
Okay.
circle that, or let me highlight that. So when you are modeling your thinking, you're acting as if you are a student. You're not
okay.
being facetious or sarcastic, but you're going through a process that's realistic for the students.
And that's exactly what I did with this reading.
The first-
I
yeah.
went through and then I was like, oh, let me see if I can find a definition for this. So then I flipped into my textbook. And that's
Yes.
what I would have wanted them to do.
Yes.
But I didn't do it while they
Yes.
were watching. I did this by
Yes.
myself.
Yes.
And then I told them to do this.
Yes.
But if they saw me doing it at
Yes.
the same time, yeah, I like
Yes.
that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So kudos to you,
Thank you.
and your group, and ensuring that literacy is the common strand. Good job.
Thank you.
Good job.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for
Oh, thanks for all that wisdom.